The murmured myth. The town of Black Hollow was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled deep within a dense forest, it was a place where the trees whispered secrets to those who dared to listen, and the fog clung to the ground like a shroud. The townsfolk were friendly enough, but there was always something off about them. A guarded look in their eyes, a hesitation in their voices when certain topics were broached. And then there was the ritual. No one ever spoke of it openly, but if you listened closely, really closely, you could hear the faint murmurs in the dead of night. The ritual. The one that no one talks about. I first heard about it when I was 12 years old. My grandmother, a stern woman with a face carved from stone, had warned me never to wander into the woods after dark. "There are things out there," she said, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "Things that don't belong in this world. And if you're not careful, they'll find you." At the time, I dismissed it as just another one of her superstitious ramblings. But as I grew older, I began to notice the strange patterns in our town. Every year, on the last night of October, the entire town would gather in the square for what they called the Harvest Festival. It was supposed to be a celebration of the autumn harvest, but there was something unsettling about it. The way the bonfire roared higher than any fire should, the way the townsfolk chanted in unison, their voices low and guttural, the way the children were always sent home early, their faces pale and drawn. And then there were the disappearances. Every few years, someone would vanish without a trace. A young woman, a child, an elderly man. The authorities would search for weeks, but they never found a single clue. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. The townsfolk would murmur amongst themselves, their eyes darting nervously toward the woods, but no one ever said a word to the outsiders. I left Black Hollow when I turned 18, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the town. But no matter how far I went, I could never quite shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to return. And now, 10 years later, I'm back. My grandmother passed away last month, and I returned to Black Hollow to settle her estate. The town looks the same as it did when I left, the same crumbling buildings, the same eerie silence. But there's something different this time. Something in the air. A tension that wasn't there before. As I walked through the town square, I noticed the posters for this year's Harvest Festival. The date is circled in red, and beneath it, in bold letters, it reads, "The ritual must be observed." I feel a chill run down my spine. The ritual. The one that no one talks about. I've always been curious, but now, for the first time, I feel a sense of dread. Something is wrong in Black Hollow. Something dark and ancient. And I can't shake the feeling that I'm about to uncover a secret that was never meant to be found. Part 2. The Gathering Storm. The days leading up to the Harvest Festival were filled with an eerie sense of anticipation. The townsfolk went about their business as usual, but there was a tension in the air, a palpable unease that seemed to grow with each passing day. I spent most of my time sorting through my grandmother's belongings, trying to distract myself from the growing sense of dread. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It started with small things: a shadow moving in the corner of my eye, a faint whisper in the wind, a cold breath on the back of my neck. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, but as the days went on, the sensations grew stronger, more insistent. One night, as I was going through an old chest in the attic, I found a journal. It was my grandmother's, filled with her cramped, spidery handwriting. As I flipped through the pages, my heart began to race. The journal was filled with accounts of the Harvest Festival, detailed descriptions of the rituals, the chants, the sacrifices. My hands trembled as I read the words, my mind struggling to comprehend the horror they described. According to the journal, the ritual was performed every 7 years to appease an ancient entity that lived deep within the woods. The townsfolk believed that if the ritual was not performed, the entity would awaken and unleash its wrath upon the town. But there was more. The journal also contained a warning, written in bold, frantic letters. Do not speak of the ritual. Do not seek it out. If you do, it will find you. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The journal slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a thud. I knew I should stop reading, should burn the journal and forget I ever found it. But I couldn't. I needed to know more. As the days passed, I began to notice strange things happening around me. The townsfolk would avoid my gaze, their faces pale and drawn. The animals in the woods would fall silent as I passed, their eyes wide with fear. And at night, I would hear the faint sound of chanting, carried on the wind from deep within the forest. The night of the harvest festival arrived, and with it, a storm. The sky was dark and heavy with clouds, the air thick with the scent of rain. As I made my way to the town square, I could feel the weight of the storm pressing down on me, a sense of foreboding that made my chest tighten. The square was filled with people, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the bonfire. They stood in a circle, their voices low and guttural as they chanted in unison. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and something else, something metallic and sharp. I stood at the edge of the square, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I should leave, should run as far away as I could. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on the center of the circle. There, lying on a stone altar, was a young woman. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth gagged to silence her screams. The townsfolk continued to chant, their voices growing louder, more frantic. And then, as the storm broke and the rain began to fall, I saw it. A shadow, darker than the night, emerged from the woods. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its form shifting and twisting as it approached the altar. The townsfolk fell silent, their heads bowed in reverence. I felt a cold, primal fear grip my heart as the shadow loomed over the altar. And then, with a sound that was both a whisper and a scream, it descended upon the young woman. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I reached my grandmother's house, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew I had seen something I was never meant to see, something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. But I also knew that I couldn't leave. Not yet. There was still more to uncover, more secrets hidden in the shadows of Black Hollow. And I was determined to find them. To be continued. The hidden truth. The days after the harvest festival were a blur. I barely slept, my mind racing with the images of that night, the chanting, the altar, the shadow. The journal I had found in my grandmother's attic became my obsession. I pored over its pages, searching for answers, for some explanation that could make sense of what I had witnessed. The journal spoke of an ancient entity known as the Hollow One, a being that had existed long before the town was founded. According to the writings, the settlers of Black Hollow had stumbled upon its resting place deep within the woods. They had disturbed its slumber, and in return, it demanded a price. A life, offered every 7 years, to keep its hunger at bay. The ritual was not just a tradition, it was a pact, a desperate bargain to protect the town from annihilation. The journal detailed how the chosen sacrifice was always someone from outside the town, a traveler, a stranger, or someone who had left and returned. The townsfolk believed that offering an outsider would spare their own. My stomach churned as I realized the implications. The young woman on the altar, she hadn't been from Black Hollow. She had been chosen, just as I could have been. I began to notice the way the townsfolk looked at me now. Their once friendly smiles had turned cold, their eyes filled with suspicion. They knew I had seen too much. I could feel their collective gaze following me as I walked through the town, their whispers trailing behind me like a shadow. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my grandmother's living room, I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the thought of facing one of the townsfolk filled me with dread. I opened the door to find an elderly man standing on the porch. His face was weathered, his eyes sunken and tired. He introduced himself as Elias, a former historian of Black Hollow. He had known my grandmother, he said, and he had something important to tell me. I invited him in, my curiosity outweighing my fear. Elias sat down heavily in a chair, his hands trembling as he clasped them together. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. Elias sighed deeply. "I tried to warn your grandmother, but she wouldn't listen. She believed in the ritual, believed it was necessary to protect the town. But I've spent my life studying the history of this place, and I've come to believe that we've made a terrible mistake." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. The Hollow One isn't just some ancient entity. It's a parasite, feeding on our fear, our guilt, our desperation. Every sacrifice we make only strengthens it. And now, it's growing stronger than ever. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? Elias hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. The disappearances, they've been increasing. It used to be every 7 years, but now it's happening more frequently. The Hollow One is no longer satisfied with just one life. It wants more. I thought of the young woman on the altar, of the terror in her eyes. What can we do? Elias's expression darkened. There's a way to stop it, but it's dangerous. The Hollow One can be banished, but only by breaking the pact. Someone would have to enter its domain, deep within the woods, and destroy the relic that binds it to this world. A relic? I asked, my voice trembling. Elias nodded. A stone, carved with ancient symbols. It's hidden in a place called the Black Grove, a part of the forest that no one dares to enter. But if you can find it and destroy it, the Hollow One will be banished forever. I felt a surge of fear and determination. I'll do it. Elias looked at me with a mixture of pity and admiration. You're brave, but you don't understand what you're up against. The Hollow One will try to stop you. It will use your fears, your doubts, your memories against you. Many have tried to break the pact, but none have returned. I clenched my fists, my resolve hardening. I have to try. If I don't, more people will die. Elias studied me for a long moment before nodding. Very well. But you must be prepared. The Black Grove is not a place for the faint of heart. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. This contains everything I know about the Hollow One and the Black Grove. Study it carefully. And whatever you do, don't go alone. I took the book, my hands trembling. Thank you. Elias stood to leave, but before he reached the door, he turned back to me. One more thing. The townsfolk, they won't help you. They're too afraid of what might happen if the pact is broken. If they find out what you're planning, they'll try to stop you. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. As Elias disappeared into the night, I opened the book and began to read. The pages were filled with sketches of the relic, maps of the forest, and descriptions of the Hollow One's powers. The more I read, the more I realized how little I truly understood. But I also knew that I couldn't turn back. The fate of Black Hollow, and perhaps even the world beyond, depended on what I did next. Part 4. The Descent into Darkness. The Black Grove was a place of nightmares. Even in the daylight, the forest was unnaturally dark, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground was littered with bones. Animal, human, it was impossible to tell. I had spent days preparing for this journey, studying Elias's book and gathering what little supplies I could. But nothing could have prepared me for the oppressive atmosphere of the Black Grove. I wasn't alone. Against Elias's advice, I had enlisted the help of a childhood friend, Marcus. He had left Black Hollow years ago, but like me, he had been drawn back by the pull of the town's dark secrets. He was skeptical of my plan, but he had agreed to come, if only to keep me from doing something reckless. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the silence became suffocating. The usual sounds of the woods, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Marcus asked, his voice low and tense. I glanced at the map in my hand, though I already knew the answer. The Black Grove wasn't a place you could find by following a map. It was a place that found you. "We're close," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure him or myself. As we pressed on, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining to form a canopy so thick that barely any light filtered through. The ground beneath our feet became soft and spongy, as if we were walking on the remains of something long dead. And then, we saw it. The Black Grove was a clearing, but it was unlike any clearing I had ever seen. The trees formed a perfect circle, their trunks blackened and scarred, as if they had been burned. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, its surface stained with dark, dried blood. But it was what lay beyond the altar that made my blood run cold. A massive stone, taller than a man, stood at the edge of the clearing. It was covered in ancient symbols, their meaning unknown but undeniably sinister. The air around it seemed to shimmer, as if the very fabric of reality was being warped by its presence. "That's it," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "The relic." Marcus stared at the stone, his face pale. "What do we do now?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "We destroy it." But as I stepped forward, a voice echoed through the clearing, a voice that was both familiar and alien, a voice that seemed to come from within my own mind. "You cannot destroy what you do not understand." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was everywhere and nowhere, filling the air with a sense of dread that made it hard to breathe. "You think you can break the pact? You think you can defy me?" The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and the trees around us swayed as if caught in a violent storm. The shadows in the clearing deepened, coalescing into a form that was both human and monstrous. The Hollow One had awakened. To be continued. Part 5. The Final Confrontation. The Hollow One was a nightmare given form. Its body was a shifting mass of shadows, its features constantly changing. One moment a human face, twisted in agony, the next a gaping maw filled with rows of jagged teeth. Its eyes burned with a cold, malevolent light, and its voice was a cacophony of whispers, each one filled with despair and rage. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to comprehend the horror before me. Marcus was beside me, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "You dare to challenge me?" the Hollow One roared, its voice shaking the ground beneath our feet. "You, who are nothing but insects beneath my gaze?" I forced myself to speak, though my voice trembled. "We're here to end this. To break the pact." The Hollow One let out a sound that was both a laugh and a scream. "The pact cannot be broken. It is eternal, as I am eternal. You are fools to think otherwise." I glanced at Marcus, who nodded grimly. We had come too far to turn back now. "We're not afraid of you," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. The Hollow One's eyes narrowed, and it lunged toward us with terrifying speed. Marcus and I dove in opposite directions, barely avoiding its grasp. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. The relic, the stone, was our only hope. If we could destroy it, we could banish the Hollow One. But getting to it would be nearly impossible. The Hollow One turned its gaze on Marcus, who was clutching a makeshift weapon, a piece of wood with a sharpened end. He swung it at the creature, but it passed harmlessly through its shadowy form. "Pathetic," the Hollow One sneered, swatting Marcus aside as if he were nothing more than a fly. I saw my chance. While the Hollow One was distracted, I sprinted toward the relic, my legs burning with the effort. But before I could reach it, the ground beneath me erupted, sending me sprawling. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" the Hollow One taunted, its voice dripping with malice. I struggled to my feet, my body aching. The relic was only a few feet away, but it might as well have been miles. The Hollow One loomed over me, its form shifting and twisting as it prepared to strike. And then, I remembered something from Elias's book. The Hollow One fed on fear, but it could also be weakened by courage, by the refusal to give in to despair. I stood tall, facing the creature head-on. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me. "The pact can be broken. And I'm going to break it." The Hollow One hesitated, its form flickering as if unsure of itself. In that moment of hesitation, I lunged forward, grabbing a jagged rock from the ground and slamming it into the relic with all my strength. The stone cracked, the symbols on its surface glowing with an intense, blinding light. The Hollow One let out a deafening roar, its form beginning to dissolve. "No!" it screamed, its voice filled with rage and desperation. "You cannot do this." But it was too late. The relic shattered, and with it, the Hollow One's hold on this world was broken. Its form disintegrated into a cloud of black smoke, which was quickly carried away by the wind. The clearing fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if a great weight had been removed. Marcus groaned, pulling himself to his feet. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. The Hollow One was gone, but the scars it had left on Black Hollow would take a long time to heal. As we made our way back to the town, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of the darkness that lurked in the shadows. The ritual was over, but the secrets of Black Hollow were far from revealed. And as long as those secrets remained, the town would never truly be free. The end.